Welcome back to Deep Thoughts, ladies and gentlemen. I'm trying something new, so we'll see. I'm actually using my computer to render some images while I record. It's got plenty of horsepower to do it because I think recording doesn't do much. So we'll see. Hopefully everything stays in sync. So today is another one of those days where I am trying to, exude thought processes that I've had. And I think I've got an angle here that is rather interesting to me. Hopefully it's interesting to you. As you can see, this is going to be called colliding realities. Different than parallel realities, which I did an episode on. And there's a difference about how I want to approach this with your mind. So it's so cold that it's 44 degrees, so I'm making smoke without smoking. I should just fake it, right? It's one thing to sit around and think about things like parallel realities. You'll read an article in a magazine, but it's really just a philosophical, mathematical argument on a piece of paper for a physicist. And so it's kind of always over there. It's never where you're sitting. I have two things I want to bring to your attention to center you in the center of this discussion that might change the way you sort of perceive this, which is the following. If you've ever been touched by the Mandela effect, then for the very first time in your life, a parallel reality or some distortion in reality, something around the fabric of reality, suddenly hits you such that you're like, oh my God, this isn't just a theory anymore. I'm sitting in the middle of it. Doesn't mean any of the papers you've ever read or articles you ever read or people rumored about it were right. It just means maybe something occurred around 2013 where we got a distinction between what we remember being taught as kids and what we remember experiencing and what is today. So what's the difference? I will tell you that for me, the Mandela effect, is either taken seriously by individuals or it's poo-pooed by individuals, right? The smartest people I know on planet Earth have them. Big ones. One of the prodigy kids that I worked with for the last 10 years, she's now just turned 18. But she was around 8 when we started talking, at least. This kid is so brilliant that you could talk to her for hours and hours and hours as a person who is 20, 30 years older than her, and you wouldn't notice it. You can throw her anything and she'll grab it. She has a phenomenal memory. She is smarter than most adults. And when I say most adults, we're probably talking about 95% and up of adults. Doesn't mean she doesn't have, kid characteristics and that kind of stuff, but she's brilliant. And when I mentioned the Mandela effect to her, she'd already been down the rabbit hole because here she is. When I talked to her about the Mandela effect, it must have been, 2016? So 4 years ago. So she would have been 14. She'd just come out of that childish phase where she's, one of her biggest complaints to me was, I have to pretend to be stupid when I'm around my friends because they're not like me. It was one of the sort of a subliminal depressing thing that she had to get through, but we got her through it. She's going to love getting older. But she swore up and down. She's like, look, I just got out of this phase where Berenstain Bears were read to us as kids. And now I'm hearing it's Berenstain. Because I guarantee you it was Berenstain just a few years ago. Which technically she's talking about being about 8 years old to 12 years old. Because you'd have to dial back to apparently what we all seem to believe. I don't have any fixation on this number, but around 2013, consequently, when the CERN Hadron Collider hit its high acceleration impacts, we got this weird thing. But we got a lot more than that. Eli Whitney, as I said, was a black guy my entire life. He was also linked to my great-grandfather, Lewis Allen John, who, I guess he's my great-great, who had an invention based on the cotton gin But when I was in, I'm pretty sure it was actually third grade, because I only went to half of third grade in this one particular school in my hometown. He was taught to me as irony. A black man who picked cotton understood how they used to use branches to wrap up the cotton in a branch and pull it off and put it in a bag. And he said, geez, why don't we just create a machine that attacks a cotton tree and rips all this stuff off? Now he's a white guy from Yale. Okay. When I asked a 74-year-old friend of mine and a 58-year-old friend of mine in the same exact room, I said, what do you guys, because I said, have you heard of the Mandela effect? They said, no. I said, what do you remember about Eli Whitney? Because they go, what is it? And I said, well, let me give you an example. I'm in a big studio with a bunch of LED screens. It's just unbelievable laboratory. And these dudes looked at me. The younger guy was further away. My other buddy's in the middle. I'm about 10 feet from him. In unison, they both said, well, all I remember was he was a black guy. That's 74 years of age. And that person was raised all around the world. He got the same education. And the other guy, I have no idea what his background is. But both guys are legendarily brilliant people, validated by everything they've ever done. And they saw it differently as well. So what's the big difference there? Why am I bringing that up? Well, it takes those outside theories and it puts you right in the pilot seat. It makes it so that when you're driving down the street, you're kind of looking around going, oh my God, is this reality what I think it is? Is it a multiverse? But instead of worrying about the Higgs boson particle, which most likely doesn't exist, and worrying about whether or not the universe is going to fly apart or not, what I want to get us to start doing is, and I'm sure many of you do this, start looking at everyday reality at the most minute, subtle ways. And I want you to look at it in every dimension of reality that you can discern. Because you might start noticing other things that are potentially as engaging as the Mandela effect, not necessarily like it at all. When I started waking up in 2003 to this event on September 11th, I remember trying to show some of my family who are very close to me, hey, look at this video. This is crazy. You can see this. You can see that. Look at all this evidence. Da-da-da-da. And I remember watching them, and today I can give you an analogy, which is, again, the hosts in Westworld which is the robots, they would look at something from the outside world, and because they were programmed not to see it, their response was always, it doesn't look like anything to me. And they just couldn't see it. They were programmed not to see it. But that's sort of how my relatives were responding to unequivocal evidence that at least the official story wasn't right. And that started shocking me because I was like, wow, either you're just really stupid as a human being, or you have a very, very soft consciousness that can't see something that contradicts your narrative that you've had injected in you from the media. Maybe you're a pussycat. Maybe you're terrified of the world, and if you acknowledge anything that's different, oh my gosh, it's going to be a problem. So that shook me. I had this one session in this house probably, damn near 15 years ago. And I'm just showing videos. Like I showed the squibs coming out of the buildings. I showed physics denying this being a possibility, just all kinds of stuff. I didn't have the stuff I have today. And just kept watching. And it transitioned from me being interested in them waking up and teaming up with me to use their intellect to fill in the blanks that I don't see, right? I mean, it'd be best if 10 of us work together on a rabbit hole than one of us, right? That's why there's a lot of good YouTube channels where there's 3 or more people. And, one guy goes in one direction, girl goes another one, et cetera, right? Then we kept moving forward in time with my relatives, especially. And there might be differences in political philosophies, whether or not you should change a country to be socialistic or keep it to be capitalistic. and different subjects. I mean, just hundreds of subjects. And I kept seeing them differ, which is fine. But then when I would listen to their rationale, it was amazing how they were absorbing. Well, I would say this much. I probably used the wrong word there. They would come back to me with this, it doesn't look like anything to me, mentality. Unable to see what everyone else is not having a problem seeing. I thought, man, that's really weird. And in a particular night, and this is probably damn near 10 years before I started the show. Don't remember. I started having this little voice in my head, like one of those little celestial voices where you're kind of like, who am I talking to, man? Or who am I listening to, I should say. But this heavy instinct which said two things. One, you're all right. Don't worry about anything. You are in one reality and they are in another reality, and you are merely sharing these meetings that you have when you get together. Have you ever had just the basic situation where you've been in your house, well, especially in 2020, you've been in your world for quite a while, you got your stuff, whatever that is, your TVs, your keyboards, your guitars, your art supplies, whatever it is you're doing, your backyard. And then you go to someone else's house and it feels like a new world. Their house is different. It can be totally cool, it could be totally mangy, whatever. But you're kind of like, wow, this is like a little adventure away from home. Definitely happens when you vacation, but you premeditate in your mind that vacationing is something that's going to introduce something totally different the further you go away from home. Like when I went to Hawaii for the first time, man, talk about another dimension, man. I went through the old airport where, Elvis and Don Ho went through. And so I felt the entire time like I was in a different planet with humans. Wonderful experience. When you travel to a foreign country, it's massively like that. The more observant you are, of course. But you can do it within the States, with wherever country you live. You travel across the country to visit your parents, visit a buddy, whatever. And what we, I think, fail to recognize is there might be a bigger game going on when we travel from place to place. If the human consciousness can truly forge a proprietary reality around you, because the human mind is a proprietary reality, it projects electricity and thought and frequency out into the universe. But it has a limited range of influence, a sphere around the human body. Who knows the radius? But you start to create this reality, and you start to love it. That's why a lot of folks don't like to travel. They like where they are. They feel comfortable where they are. Maybe they have some subconscious fears of the unknown, little xenophobic precautions. But I don't think we really recognize it for what it is. I think we simply say, it's just because my country makes homes like this and roads like this and traffic signs like this, and we typically buy these cars and wear those clothes and listen to this music. And so we just chalk it up to a big difference in the commodities that we purchase. It's interesting when you go to an amusement park and you just leap into a ride. Disneyland is a fantastic example. There's rides, there's worlds, right? So Tomorrowland and Fantasyland and Frontierland and Adventureland. Now Star Wars Land. What's interesting is, to me, the more patina that one of those areas in the park has, the more that you can feel the underlying genetics of the individuals that manicure the place, that created the place, that thought it up. It's not just a bunch of corporate brands on rides. The deeper you understand Walt Disney's intention for the universe, you don't see those brands. You're just like, yeah, whatever. That's modern day defaming and defacing of a great man and a great Imagineer, plus him hiring like minds to continue the circuitry. And of course, every ride was built by brilliant people, tons of them. But you go into Pirates of the Caribbean, you immediately get swallowed up into its environmental influences. It's different. But could there be more than just the paint, the sculpting, the animatronics, the water? Could it be that because Disney, as an empire, hires individuals who are definitely drinking the Kool-Aid, and I drink the Kool-Aid too, in that particular realm. Again, Disneyland for me is the one that really touches my heart because that's the one that Walt made. And it's the only one he ever saw. But you're in there, and you're in a different world. It starts to feel different. There's two portions of that ride. One of the portions is a cave, less intimate, less feedback, because human beings don't live in caves anymore. At least I don't. But once you turn the corner and you go through the little portal, you get into the pirate scene, you get into the little town, and now it's starting to have things that we have. Make-believe homes, pirates that are like human beings, not skeletons. They're singing songs. You've got donkeys singing. You have people being auctioned off, you know. And there's just this weird, cozy, bizarre thing that's going on inside that influence. Well, if you think about it, it's built by people who are trying to create an illusion, and it's maintained by people that absorbed the illusion because it was already built when they got there. So everyone's consciousness goes through different phases. Of course, when you work there for a long time, it all becomes machines that have to be maintained. But you'd be surprised, man. The people that are very intense Disney workers are absolutely embedded in the good part of the franchise. I've got more than one friend who usually works there. Now it's all on hold. I just asked a guy I met today that works there. I said, why is Disney World open? Disneyland's not. And he goes, our governor. And now they're going through like their second round of layoffs. Just nuts, man. I got friends that are sous chefs, friends that used to do security, a couple friends that used to do security. But they're exceptionally wonderful people. Like their hearts and souls are exactly the kind of people that if Walt met them himself, he would hire them. I think the shift in thinking that I'm trying to get acknowledged here, because I think some of you already do it. If you're not doing it, it's a real interesting twist on your day. You know, we get up, we get cleaned up, we get in our cars, we go places. We're always ingesting realities. Now, what are the elements at play when discussing realities colliding? Meaning, what variables change? What variables exchange data? Which variables cancel out other variables? I'm going to put a graphic that I'm going to make on screen of sort of my vision of, in my brain, of how this works. It's going to be a silly couple planes of reality, or maybe multiple ones colliding with each other, storylines that might be projected on a 2D plane. But I want you to think about the Earth's surface. It doesn't matter what shape you think the Earth is. You will be, at any one point in time, at an XY longitude, latitude coordinate on the surface of this place we are on. I'm in one place, you're in a different place. And we simply chalk up reality to, hey, we're all in the same reality, and I'm over here and you're over there. You have your stuff, I have my stuff. I have the way I think, you have the way you think. And of course, the human mind's unique perception of reality is built out of all the experiences that we had, at least since we were born, probably several influences before we were born. If reincarnation is a real thing, which I think it is, I don't think it's linear. I don't think you just simply die and get reborn. I don't believe that. I think there's logic to a green room break between lives to assess what you just experienced. Perhaps when you come back, you could start right after you died and go into a new baby, but there would be nothing preventing you from going back in time, going forward in time, changing planets, whatever. So I know that there's a lot of variables and possibilities at play when thinking about what is your perception of reality. Hence, you can't put forth, in my opinion, this theory of parallel realities or colliding realities, which I'm going to say colliding is a little bit different than the parallel, until we can kind of dismiss everything that's incidental in our perception of everything. Now, there was a show on TV called Fringe. It is an amazing show. I believe it has 5 seasons. It is worth a purchase on DVD. It is truly a gem that I do not know how this didn't become a household word for everybody, not just the ones that bumped into it. The acting's fantastic. The writing's fantastic. It's funny. It's sad. It's romantic. It is a huge technological series. The writer is beyond brilliant. He borrows very little in a way that you can feel him borrowing. He borrows so subtly from other things that it's not like reading a Stephen King novel where the guy ripped off at least 50% of everything he wrote from a Twilight Zone. You can just see it. Now, Stephen King did come up with some of his own ideas that were obviously fantastic. But in his later years, he was ending novels like it didn't matter anymore. Strange. But what Fringe deals with is a collision in realities. And they really exhaust what factors could be at play. In their version of this collision, they have a counterpart like the dark Star Treks, Spock with a beard, I think not, You have a counterpart on the other side. Could be a good person, could be a bad person. But there's a lot more at play, which I won't ruin the series for, but it creates the tension when these, literally, it's not a doppelganger, it's like a copy of them in the other universe starts to interact with the other universe. And it's a very specific technology that creates the problem, a very specific event that shouldn't have occurred that occurred that gets the whole thing started. It is brilliant. I mean, the evolution of it's fantastic, and I will tell you this, Fringe ends better than any series of its kind. It really has a real ending and not one of these, we're just done making Fringe shows, so we're just going to end this, right? Not like the way that Westworld ended in season 3. We ran out of money. The lead actress is really strange in real life. We're tired of dealing with their crap, so we're done. What would be the variables that you would be concerned about colliding? Well, I can tell you right away, the ones that you'll be concerned about are the ones that affect you very specifically. But that's a big bucket of possibilities, big bucket of variables. You have 2 specific categories of what's considered your life when it comes to a collision. You have your outside external world. That is, where do you live? Who do you know? What book did you read when you were a kid? Who invented the cotton gin? Blah, blah, blah. Then you have the really super important one, which is you personally. Your physiology, your mental capabilities. You're feeling secure today. Do you feel secure the next day if a collision were to occur? Then there's the basic question of, am I talking about an event in history which shouldn't be occurring, but is occurring due to some invention? Or is this a natural ecosystem of all reality? The message I got when I was dealing with the conflicting thoughts of how the hell am I seeing what I'm seeing and they don't see it? There's a picture of a beam that was cut at a patented angle in one of the World Trade Centers after they fell. That angle of the beam is patented by the family Controlled Demolition. Controlled Demolition was the first group of people allowed on the pile of the World Trade Centers after they went down, before the alphabet agencies roamed around for the other stuff to put fake red boxes on the ground, right? Or the black boxes, which are actually red. So you're looking at something that's pretty conclusive that this organization participated in that event. The beams were cut in perfect sizes to fit on flatbed trucks. Well, that's what that family does. They figured that out a long time ago. Why don't we just cut the beams at exactly the length that'll fit on a vehicle? Of course, several of the beams were twisted and turned and thrown 800 yards because that's what happens when things fall down. They eject from the center. It's just air pressure, man. But I'm showing people this stuff. People who are supposed to be smart. People, if you ask them how smart they were, oh my gosh, boy, they'd have to rewrite the IQ scale for how smart these people are. But the message I got that was just some instinctual little wind in my mind was, this is natural. And this is just what happens. Now, have you ever seen a situation where, I'm going to change the subject on you, you're going to think, but I'm going to bring it back to this. Let's go to some of the small multi-celled bacteria that we see. Amoebas especially is a good one. But any one of those just over single-cell creatures. And they have a little membrane that makes up their body. And sometimes that membrane will be pierced by a laboratory experiment, but sometimes they're injured. They're bit by another being. And that internal cellular structure, or even if it's a single cell, the mitochondria starts to leak out. And that can be part of a procreation, or I should say evolutionary injury, where as it leaks out and heals up, it creates a limb. It's almost as if you were to say the interior of the cell is one reality and the outside region is another reality, and it's leaking out into this reality. It's pushing its way in due to an anomaly that broke the membrane. Well, what if that sort of model is sort of what we're dealing with right here, except it's organic, it's normal. Maybe it's not normal, and because of messing with electricity in the form of a collider, could be a form of a bunch of things. I mean, could you imagine? This is a great little premise for a sci-fi movie that's sort of like old. The second we created the telegram, here we are stringing electricity all around the surface of the earth to transmit telegrams. Eventually, what's it turn into? It turns into the telephone. Then what's that turn into? It turns into radio. Then it turns into television. Then it turns into big-time communications for military. Then it turns into internet. And now we have saturated the surface of the earth like a Borg planet. And now, with 5G coming out, in a couple of years when the high band goes live, we're all going to get migraines and vertigo and puke our brains out as 100 billion hertz of little teeny tiny millimeter waves. It's between a centimeter and a millimeter, depending on how high they turn it up. They're going to be beaming all over the place out of every single traffic or street light with a little 5G on top. As each broadcast technology evolves and becomes more and more powerful, perhaps this could be the mechanism by which we are ripping, because it's moving what? It's moving electricity. It is creating polar waves of electricity. Your cell phone creates a polar wave around the phone. One goes one way, one goes the other way. It's just like the Van Allen belts coming out of planet Earth. When the cell tower wants to talk to your phone, it is piercing that wave, creating a binary chain of ones and zeros and nulls. And so your phone knows it's getting a call. It's digital. It's fast. It's amazing. Well, electricity is another way of saying what? It's an upper construct of ether. And if ether is the bedrock of our universe, and it's a bedrock in two different perspectives, in my opinion. Ether is the bedrock by which all spiritual energy liaisons to be in this world. Anything intelligent with consciousness in this world is a life force from this perhaps parallel, but it might be very nebulous on the other side, who knows? But it pierces in and becomes a dog, a cat, a human being, anything that's alive. Perhaps everything's alive. We don't need to worry about that right now. Plant life is alive. But as we start stirring the pot on the surface of the earth, we could be ripping a hole in the membrane of what we have traditionally understood as reality. Well, what happens when you got a trash bag full of liquid and you accidentally drag it through the house and that bag isn't completely sealed? You got crap all over the floor. Stuff leaked out from the inside to the outside where it wasn't supposed to be. A little bit of a mess. Well, what if this is organic? And what if this thing that we don't think is tangible, right? We don't think emotions are tangible. You can't put love in a jar. You can't put reality in a jar necessarily. From we're thinking about the fabric of reality. It is the jar, man. But as we ramp up whatever we're doing, if we did break the seal, it just gets more chaotic and more chaotic and more chaotic. Some people believe that the world is becoming more evil. Some people believe the Hadron Collider people are those kind of people because, again, they worship Shiva. The goddess of destruction. They held those weird rituals. They made those videos that were really just bizarre. I'll just say that much. Looked like pretty weird Maria Abramovich kind of stuff, but who knows? But here's what's interesting about the Mandela effect. A bunch of things were labeled as Mandela effects. And again, it's named after Nelson Mandela because when he died in 2013, a bunch of people remember him dying in the early 90s, I guess, when he was first put in jail. He was only there for a little while, and then he died in prison. I don't have that memory. But if you do, I totally respect the fact that you do. Just like you may have thought Eli Whitney was a white guy the entire time, and you think I'm kind of weird for thinking he was a black guy. And, there's a lot of excuses about, oh, you just got the other black inventor mixed up with that guy. Both those guys were represented at the same time I learned about Eli. Now, it might be that we just say, well, listen to his name. It's not really a slave name. But I don't think that's accurate because by that time, we were trading names. We weren't Kunta Kinte anymore. They were taking regal names. If he was who I was raised for him to be, he was a very intelligent dude. I came from an intelligent family. But we have this moment in 2013 where we had this surge in the Mandela effect. And then what happened? A bunch of fake stuff came out. People were being jerk-offs with it because they were trying to muddy up the water with it. Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, for instance, recorded 2 versions of the song and decided to go with a more optimized version, knocking out verses and rewriting things. Even the music itself got more refined by Jazzy Jeff, as I understand it. And so someone released the unapproved version and said, oh, see, so I used to remember it. And, well, it could be that way, I guess. But, yeah, it could be that way. It could be that, one reality, the other one got approved, and the one we like today never got created. But I think that's some trickery. But Anne Rice not remembering what she called Interview with the Vampire or Interview with a Vampire. Whichever way it is, she was interviewed for 10 years, plus all the people who made the movie with her, all saying it the way that it's not today. I mean, how is it that the author of the book can't remember how it said, Luke, I'm your father, being recreated by Mark Hamill and the dude who plays Darth Vader's voice for 30 plus years. And then all of a sudden, it's, no, I'm your father, which does make more sense to me nowadays, but it took me a while. But we don't have, unless you're following it and I'm unaware, we don't have another big surge of these things. It's almost like we took inventory of what splattered into our universe from another one. Thank God it's nothing big. That's the cool thing. It's not like up is down, down is up, and north is south, south, all that kind of stuff, to the point where we're crashing our cars because, imagine you wake up one day and the red light means green and the green light means red. If you watch some crash videos online, you'd be hell-bent to defend that position. Those people just run red lights like it's candy. It's just nuts. But what is the theory of parallel realities in general? I've been looking at this stuff since I was probably just before I was a teenager, I'd say. you read papers, they're interesting. And I used to get tons of tech magazines when I was a kid. And, you'd have these interesting models where there's a bunch of bubbles. The movie Brainstorm goes with the bubble theory. But that was a bunch of bubbles for an individual's life. But, they'll say like this sphere that is our universe is just one universe, and then there's another sphere, another sphere. So sometimes it's a bunch of neighboring spheres. Sometimes it's, once we started realizing the fourth dimension, we started to acknowledge the fact that these could all be on top of each other and simply vibrating at a different frequency, thus sharing the space. It's that old thing you find out when you're young. And if you came up with this before someone showed you this, then you have a nice IQ. When I was a kid, there was this anomaly. There's a name for the paradox, and I cannot remember what the hell the name of it is. But you push your two fingers together, but you don't touch them. And then in your brain, you zoom up. So there's a bunch of space between it. And you push them close together, and you keep zooming up. But your fingers, when you think about the divisibility of numbers, should never technically touch, because you can always, from a perspective, zoom in. The reality is that you have to be shrinking, and I think that your velocity has to continually accelerate infinitely for that to be the case. You'll start living in an utter paradox of existence. But since they do touch, we have, at least, I guess you could say, proof that our fabric of reality that we coexist in with our souls does have a finite unit of size. And I think that's the ethereal particle. Could be the ethereal particle is small or has something else smaller. Could be that there's 4 or 5 different ethereal particles that have different shapes and spin different ways. But for now, for me, it's probably a sphere, since that's the easiest, most natural shape the universe creates. And hence, because it is a sphere, through perhaps billions of years of being clobbered in some vacuum, however this stuff came to be, whether it was just an is or not, you have this thing you can rely on when you think about how things could be put together. So there wouldn't be, technically speaking, unless something very different is occurring, this ability to layer realities infinitely. However, you might be able to layer them to an extent where everything that is absolutely possible, everything that could be calculated, is accounted for. And the reason why is you have this finite limit, which is because your fingers can touch. We know it's not infinite in terms of possibilities. Another thing to think about when you think about the colliding realities is we like to keep things simple in our mind because we're human beings. And so you might just think, two realities colliding together, how bad could it be? That's what I love about time travel movies, and any movie that talks about multiple dimensions. They only go to 2 because they know that the audience has a really hard time understanding anything more than 2. When the movie Inception was released, what was phenomenal about Inception, and I don't mean to insult anyone here, but I will just tell you quite honestly, my more intellectual, existential friends love that movie. They may not love the writing and whatever, what are the actors, but they really like the concept of it, which I don't even know how many realities they ended up creating in that particular movie, but it's like half a dozen at least. For me, I think they limited it brilliantly. They gave you enough that it would sort of make you hurt, but then stopped. And then simplified some of the realities, visited them very infrequently, so you didn't have to lean on. Let's say it was 6 realities. I don't know what the number is, but they didn't make you have to memorize 6 super detailed schematics. Each reality seemed to have half substance in it. So the first reality has a very detailed reality. Second one has half that content. Third, half the half, half the half, half the half. So by the time it's at the end, the last one just does like maybe a flick of a button that you got to remember. My friends who are more simple, God bless them, they will tell me they hate that movie. And not because of the acting and the writing, but because of its complexity. There's something to be said for a beautiful mind that is simple. It's a blissful thing to exist in. So what if I am onto something in this, and we want to go ahead and explore this? And again, it's not my idea. Colliding, I did some research before I did the episode to see sort of where people's theories on colliding realities exist. Very minimal. Everything seems to really go towards parallel. Now, if you have some information about a good book or a good video that really talks about this, please link it below. Please, please, please. But now, let's compare one way we might teach something and another way that we might actually observe it. What if the reality is that this is sort of extremely chaotic, but okay? That not one reality is colliding with your reality, but billions and trillions and quadrillions, etc., to the power of the same. So every single second that you choose what you're going to do, you're like in a sort of one of those funny houses at a carnival. You're in the Hall of Mirrors. And every time you take a step, remember when you're in the Hall of Mirrors? You ever been in one of those where there's a bunch of mirrors? I saw a really cute video the other day where a daughter was trying to lead her father through one of these things in broad daylight, and she's slamming into windows, and he's doing the same thing. But you feel like every step you take, you're disoriented because you're getting reality reflected back to you so many different ways in the Hall of Mirrors that you're like, it doesn't even matter which one you're in. You want to get out of that place to reestablish something far more linear, where you don't have reality reflected back to you more than a couple times when you're in the bathroom. But if this were true and we were able to uncover perhaps a device that could sense this sort of thing, perhaps just observing reality and logic, if anyone really tore reality using a Hadron Collider, maybe someone defects out and says, okay, here's the deal, this is what we're doing. We're not looking for a Higgs boson. That was a bunch of crap. We're not looking for Big Bang because that never happened. What we're really doing is yanking a reality down to this one to see what would happen. And even though this thing is 17 miles around, or kilometers, I guess you could say, biggest machine man's ever made, by the way, we're only bringing in like a teaspoon of some other reality. And we turned it on and we did it. And now we're not going to ever do that again until we figure out all the data. What's the damage that we did? And all they did was they mixed up, potentially, if that rumor was true, I'm not convinced, some Berenstain Bears, Eli Whitney, a bunch of other little things. It does seem strange, right, that someone would theorize that the Hadron Collider had this profound effect on our reality. But it only brought in like children's books and, a guy who invented a cotton gin in America. My other question is, and I think I read this once, but for those of you in different countries than America, what were the Mandela effects for you? Or did you not have any? Was it just an epiphany for America? But if we were to teach this, most likely it would evolve, right? We would go into a classroom in our Deep Thoughts University, and we would draw a two-dimensional plane tipped up on its side, and then another plane tipped up on its side, maybe coming in at a 90-degree angle. So you kind of have a plus sign of two planes. And at the point of impact, you have potentially an infinitely small moment where the two collided and information traded places. But because it's an infinitely small collision, because a plane has no dimensions, really, you need a third dimension to really get volume. That's where you get a cube out of a plane. Then maybe there's some weird thing going on. You're getting little pushes and prods here and there. Ever had any intuition in your life? Ever have some epiphany of a story and then all of a sudden it fleets and goes away? What if that is nothing more than you acknowledging one of the impacts? And isn't it interesting, if you're creative, when you go to bed and you put your head on the pillow, when you relax your mind and you divorce yourself in this reality because your eyes are closed, you're going into the twilight zone, the stage before dreaming, you'll hear a song that you should write down. You hear a joke you should write down. You get a premise of a movie you should really write down. You laugh at a joke because you thought of something funny, but you know if you don't get up and write it down, it's in one ear and out the other. Don't even remember it the next day. You might remember, God, there was something funny I laughed about the other day. What was it about? And you search your mind. And unlike anyone that told you a joke that day, if I told you a joke, even a one-liner, and you're like, oh, man, that's so hilarious. And then the next day I say, what was that one-liner I told you? You would at least be able to come up with some of the DNA. Oh, it was about something. What was that thing about the guy and the day? You'd have something if you couldn't explicitly remember why you laughed. But these little moments, these little gems, these quote-unquote ideas, which people feel like come from the heavens sometimes, if you don't grab them like the butterfly net and hold on to them and be careful to them and write them down before they disappear, they're gone. I told you the other day about the holograms that I have heard theorized to be created. And again, one of them is very above board, I believe, which is burning air. Two lasers go in a direction in a room, and when they hit each other, they end up burning the air molecules instantaneously at a microscopic level, and then another laser projects onto the burned packet of air, thus creating light. And because it is a burned combustion in the room at a microscopic level, it's opaque, so you can't see through it. And that's supposedly how they're trying to create those holographic tables that you see in all the sci-fi movies so that the military can have, something spin around. All right. Well, let's take that in your brain. Two things colliding create a state of which you can finally see the laser. Lasers in general. Any of you have seen a laser at an amusement park? You got one in your house. You're trying to make it visible. You know that when you shine it on the ground to get your cat running around, you don't see the path from the laser beam pointer to the ground unless someone's smoking a big fat cigar in the room, or you got a smoke machine, or you're outside and it's foggy. Then you can see it. Well, let's play this back and look at it from a sensory standpoint. Why do you see anything at all? You see something because of vibration in the soup of ether, the ripples in the pond, when you throw the rock into the pond and the ripples come back in a perfect circle. Those ripples hit the rods and cones in your eye and manifest an electrical pattern that gets beamed back to your brain upside down and backwards, and your brain sorts it out so you can see something. Why do you see colors? Well, different frequencies register as different colors, and thank God human beings have agreed on what color palettes are for the most part. There are some colorblind folks out there, which I think is very interesting. We have colorblind folks. I don't think anything's wrong with them. They might actually be seeing more. Who knows? They don't see perhaps vibrance, but they might see hues. You never know. Or contrast, way better than we do. You never know. So it's all these things working together that are creating any form of your senses. If I touched your hand with my finger, well, your brain, which is inside your head, is telling you that they have a holographic representation of your body inside your brain that actually touched you way down there on the tip of your finger. But you don't actually have a brain in your finger. Your brain is telling your consciousness that you have instrumentalities, usually 10 fingers and 10 toes and some torso and arms and legs, and it's happening at exactly where I'm touching you. We know from amputees, they still feel their limbs for quite a while. All right. What if the very fabric of this universe is nothing more than a bunch of collisions, giving us the impression that we have a universe? What is the big problem with conceiving of the universe? Well, the big problem is we can't understand it. It seems to be infinite. We're looking out at the sky, and it's like, how far does that go? The thing I mentioned the other day in an episode, which is, well, how do you keep everything from floating away? And that's why they created this pole gravity theory, which is a phenomenon. Well, if you have a container, what's a container made out of? But what if all that doesn't matter because this is all an illusion created by a bunch of colliding energies? Let's just call it energies. Definitely not probably at the huge upper construct of electrons and atoms. It must go way down below that. But here we are, this super construct as a human being within this crazy mishmash of colliding dimensions of existence, of colliding energies, forces. When someone tells you that, your emotions don't exist, the interesting thing about when someone tells you that these things aren't real is that when you dream, like I've been saying, or you don't even have to dream, you don't have to go all the way into a theta state or, whatever frequency they want to blame on dreaming. You can sit here and daydream. Daydream all the time. Those things that you want that you don't have. What you would do if you had that car or that girl or that guy or that money or whatever. You can dream right away inside your brain. And you can see it pretty real inside your brain without jumping into a dream. Well, how's that possible? How's that possible that you have this capability of having this little synthesizing, reality machine inside your brain? I don't know. Sure seems to me like it's all made of the same thing, isn't it? But merely because we climb into this suit, as Douglas Adams would say, this monkey suit, and we are temporarily human for one particular blip in our existence. This one's real, and everything else is fake. Really? Let me give you another thought process. You're with your lover, and your lover does something really wonderful. Perhaps they just say something to you. They say something to you that just lights you on fire in a good way. They make you feel loved. They make you feel aroused for whatever reason. What's interesting about arousal is that, there's the old saying about the anticipation of the kiss is sometimes more intense than the actual kiss itself. But sometimes it's that perfect someone just saying the simplest little thing, which says, I love you, and when we get home, I'm tearing you apart. And it's just an amazing feeling, but it's almost nothing. You could say it in front of your preacher, and they wouldn't even know what you're talking about. Subtleties. All right, well, you're in this body, and what's the difference between your imagination for something? You could imagine something and feel wonderful. There are folks that claim that they study before they play the lottery and imagine that they've won, like the guys that practice basketball free throws for real life, and then a group that goes home and imagines for hours inside their mind that they're throwing swish after swish after swish. And then the third group, which is the control group, that does neither. They don't practice and they don't imagine. When they bring the three groups together, obviously the ones that really practice hard, they're the best, but the second group is just right behind them. And the third group is just fumbling all over the place. The human body is a high degree of what we are acknowledging as realities. They always tell us we have 5 senses, right? And of course they make movies of like Sixth Sense, and they'll write articles like, can you get in touch with your sixth sense? And it really limits your mind's perception of reality. Well, I guess I only have 5. I shouldn't even look for anything else. But those who are open-minded in this world tend to have more paranormal experiences than any other group on planet Earth. Why? Because they're truly enlightened, in my opinion. They see more. That is the definition of being enlightened. That's why it blows my mind that people don't talk about dreaming much. I mean, how many out of 8 billion people roughly on this planet, how many are having vivid dreams every night? Like I said in the previous episode, I interview my friends about dreaming. And it's interesting. Those that don't dream, it's pretty bland conversation, of course. But those that do dream will suddenly light up because they're like, oh, you want to talk about dreaming? Oh, gosh, I had this dream. It's 4:17 in the morning, so people are starting to wake up here. But they get into dreams and they'll say things right off the bat. One of the most common phrases I get out of people who remember their dreams, or they don't typically remember their dreams, but they have a few doozies. And what's funny is the archetype of them acknowledging their dreams is, I don't dream that much, And then, well, there was this one dream. And then they'll go, it was just like, I remember just like it was yesterday. So the funny thing is they negate themselves with this almost self-deprecating sentence of, I don't dream at all, man. And then as soon as they remember that one dream, then they remember the second dream, the third dream, the fourth dream, and they remember, usually a nightmare is something that someone can remember. And it's usually when they were a little kid. And sometimes it's really silly things. Sometimes it's very vivid. I'm going to recap something with you guys, and the OG listeners, bear with me. There's a point to me repeating this. I've done so many episodes, I feel obligated to prove I don't have Alzheimer's, or that I'm biting my own content without acknowledgement. My dad scared the crap out of me when I was a kid. He thought it was funny. He was a really young father. So by the time I was 4, he was just 27. But for whatever reason, man, I don't know, he just immature, I think. But he'd let me watch a really scary movie from back in the 50s to like that little fucking African doll with the knife that ran after that woman in the 70s. And then he would try to recreate it that night for me, so I would be in absolute horror. And so I started having tons of nightmares as a kid. My toys coming after me, this weird mannequin chick attacking me. And this stuff went on from at least the age of probably 3 or 4 all the way up to 7 when I finally just said, I'm done with this, and I defeated this reoccurring mannequin chick that was always terrorizing me. Here's the thing. The reason why I'm bringing that back up again is I'm starting to suspect that might have really augmented my mind. And it really, I think, made me very independent as a human being, because when you're in these nightmares, who's not there? I don't remember anyone telling me. You tell me if you've had this archetype. You have a nightmare, it's reoccurring, and dad comes in and saves you in your nightmare. Mom comes in and saves you in your nightmare. Superman comes in and saves you in your nightmare. I've never heard that. If you've had that experience, please share it, because I never had anyone help me in my dreams. I'm on my own. Hey, kid, you tired of this crap? You've been dreaming about this broad for 3 to 4 years. Hey, you're going to have to nut up and kick her ass. That's exactly what I did. And I remember in real life, I went from allowing kids to bully me, allowing kids to lead me, to being OG. Just like I run my life. You want to be with me? That's fine. We're going to do what I want to do. I guarantee you this will be interesting. You don't, go screw yourself. Get out of my face. That's just the way I was. By the time I was 9 years old, I was a little baller, man. Dreams are super important. Your imagination is super important. And this reality is super important to be put side by side. And I want you to measure and acknowledge, if you agree with me, that these are semblances of each other. You simply have reduced states of sensory input because one occurs inside your body. And so you got this vessel that will report, hey, that's really hot. You're burning, And the other one, you don't have any feeling. Inside of a dream, I am unaware of really feeling tactile things. I think the times that I have felt something in my dream, perhaps something was touching me in real life. I told you guys once that I had a dream of being in this room, and a zombie came up and breathed on my neck. And I knew he was in the room. I thought it was kind of funny, because in my dreams, when a monster shows up, nowadays I just say, I'm going to rip this dude apart if I need to, but let's just see what he does. And that's what I did. I remember lying down, I was kind of smiling in my dream, and I felt him come up to me, and I could just hear his gurgling throat, and he was like, he was like, whatever it was. And I thought, well, let's see if he bites me, because I think I went lucid to the point I was like, I want to see if I can feel this dude. And what I felt was a super cold breath on my neck. Well, I immediately kind of like giggled and squirmed or whatever, and I woke up. And I found out that my neck was exposed to the room, and the room, unfortunately, was like out here, 44 degrees. It was really, I don't know, it wasn't 44, but it was really cold. And then I turned the heater up and went back to bed. We, I think, have plenty of empirical evidence right before our very eyes that potentially this reality is a massive collision of not just the stuff that's tangible to all of our machines today, but of a whole bunch of different elements of acknowledgeable reality. What do I mean by that? Well, obviously we have some tangible mass we're dealing with here, but if I ask you, what do you want out of life? I ask you that question. What do you want out of life? What's your purpose in life? I just watched an interview with Little Richard on David Letterman way back, I guess in the 90s. Maybe it was the 80s. Maybe it's probably the 80s. He said, I wanted to get famous because I wanted to buy a big Cadillac. Some dude in my town had a really long stretch red Cadillac, and that's why I wanted to get famous, just to get my Cadillac. Now, he was saying that because he had evolved as a man and got to a point where he realized that was not the most important thing in the world. Most folks say, to some degree, in some form of communication, I want to be happy. And if I can make other people happy at the same time I'm making myself happy, then I have won the jackpot of life. Okay. Well, what is happy? I mean, what is it? Here's a jar. Put happy in there. Go ahead and do it for me. Guarantee you it ain't a car. It's not a house. That might play host to your happiness. But unless you're doing something interesting with those devices, you're not going to be happy. If you have ever been really wealthy in your life and now you're much more down to reality, you're living within your means, and you're totally thrilled to death with virtually nothing in your life, very few possessions. You got a good roof over your head, you got transportation, you got decent food, and you're just so happy. You can sit by the fire and open a book and just crawl into Charles Dickens' Men or whatever you like. You'll realize this as you get older, the more subtle things in life are what it's all about. And if we could just get our kids, as a digression statement here, if we could just get our kids to realize that when they're young, oh my God, just think how rich our kids would be, monetarily speaking, but also spiritually. It's funny when you date, one of the things you run into the more you get older, and one of the beautiful things that can happen is, as you're younger, you're thinking about, if you're a dude and you're straight, you like girls, then you're like, oh gosh, I got to find a girl that doesn't want more stuff than I can afford to give her. Those that try to supply the one that wants everything, well, they end up very unhappy, broke, and divorced, typically. As you get older, you will run into partners that you would potentially pick who are still on that childish thing. They're still trying to get that one payoff, and so neither one of you can be happy because nothing is really tangible and real, right? I bring that up just to massage your mind into the appreciation of the subtleties of our existence. Because that's a theme, I think, in trying to acknowledge what is reality. I think, to get back to the core subject here, the big question I have for myself, and now I'm going to be observing things a little bit differently as I kind of go through this experiment. I wanted to share it with you so we can start doing this if you're not already doing it. Perhaps you're the guru on it and I'm your student. Is to look for sort of atypical turns in the script. Now you're going down the street and all of a sudden, poof, something different happens. Doesn't mean a car accident or anything. But you're in the street's not real. But I mean, life is going one way. You think your life's going to turn out one way. And then suddenly, poof, something changes. You have an epiphany. You have an enlightenment. It could be an enlightenment through something good. Could be an enlightenment through something bad. You have a near-death experience. And so you pop out and all of a sudden you can see roses everywhere. I have a good friend of mine that I mentioned earlier this year in season 5. He had a stroke last year. And, he was out of it for a while. He was completely out of it for several months, meaning he doesn't remember those months, even though we all came to visit him. Might have been the medication, not sure. Now he's completely kicking butt and taking names, man. And he took his rehabilitation seriously, and he's walking now. It's fantastic because he was in bad shape, man. He is now looking at the world completely different. He is now more interested in the subject matter that we talk about. He's not prepared at all to really ingest what we talk about because he's off on the official science thing. He calls me up and just starts going in these, it's very endearing and wonderful, but he starts telling me all about, black holes and the Big Bang and all this other stuff, as if I'm not an expert on it already, which is really funny. And he knows I'm an expert on this stuff. So I'm sitting there going, dude, okay, I don't want to hear this crap. It's all propaganda. You should really, if you want to have your mind really blown, watch a couple of my episodes and then go research this stuff and then find out. And he's a huge Tesla fan, but he's sort of one of those Tesla groupies that doesn't want to get into anything that Tesla actually did. He just wants to seem intelligent because he likes Tesla. God bless him. But that's the truth. But that near-death experience for him, it woke him up. It completely woke him up. We don't want to have to necessarily go through those experiences to see something wonderful occur, in my opinion. Again, if we had a good university, one on planet Earth, because I don't know if there's one on planet Earth, where we could bring in the meticulous, build a true curriculum. We would need buildings. We would need divisions of research. And then we would have yearly summits or maybe every, quarterly summits to bring hemispheres of thought together that don't typically come together to see if there are correlations. And we should expect that there aren't any correlations, such that if we find one, maybe something interesting is going on, right? And I'll give you kind of a what if. And then we'll get back on this thing. But this is, again, more of an exercise of opening your mind to the possibility of what reality is and abstracting it tremendously to what it might truly be. Because again, human minds are very finite, and we typically only feel comfortable if we live well within the means of what logic loops we have learned by ingesting tons of mind-numbing, closed-minded paradigms. But what if something as atypical as we are searching for indications of colliding realities? We want to see Mandela effects happen organically under the microscope. And that's metaphorical, of course. And again, if somebody at the Hadron Colliders figured out a way to crack it, because they truly are geniuses and not a bunch of people living in the 60s science, that'd be great. But imagine we increase our enlightenment, we increase the particle per million that we can view with our human eyes, without microscopes, without machines, and we start to see a lot more in the universe. Well, the minute we can start doing that, we can start isolating more variables in the universe and thus distill from the universe far more invention and creativity than we'd ever thought possible before. For instance, what if this exercise in a university that's properly organized with true charters and thought, where people are coming into rooms understanding, leave everything that you learned from birth at the door, and bring everything into the room that you learned while you were here, and with like-minded individuals who carry that discipline outside the university. And suddenly, a bunch of us are in some weird little conversation. We keep stringing things together. We're talking about colliding realities, and then we start talking about the fabric of the universe and how this could be created through, again, collisions in things that make up sight, collisions in things that make up sound and touch and emotion and consciousness. And then suddenly, poof, we've got a zero-point energy system figured out. Because all of a sudden, how to harness the energy right out of the universe becomes so obvious. Because we lifted off all these onion layers of control, of stagnation. For me, it's just a frontier that is absolutely phenomenal, interesting, amazing. And what's nice about this entire discipline of thinking is that it keeps you young. Doesn't matter how old your physical body is, we know that thinking and solving problems and investigating and connecting and deducing is what creates new brain cells, flushes out the old ones. Can you imagine? You ingest some vaccination, which numbs your brain. And therefore, you don't make any new brain cells. So whatever you got when you got that vaccination, it's done. Whatever you got's what you got. And so thinking becomes more difficult, becomes self-defeating, becomes depressing. But you get into a really cool university of thought where you come in, imagine us. I'm in my 50s, right? You get the older folks like myself with, a whole range of folks, but it won't matter how old you are. That's the nice thing. So if you're young and you think like this, and man, you've already won, let me just tell you. But we bring in kids that haven't thought this way, but they have this desire to see more. They have this sort of pent-up tension in their soul because they are more open-minded, and thus they are getting these little montages and collages of epiphanies and inventions, but they don't know how to sort it out. And they walk into our little club of thought, and it's like, there it is, kid. There's all the cognitive sciences you could ever use to continue expanding your brain. And there's a division for dreams over there. There's a division of ethereal sciences. There's a 0-point energy wing over there. There's the supernatural over there. I mean, it just on and on and on. And they're coming in fresh. They're coming in young. They're going to turn into a professor at this college because instead of stagnating at a university as a lazy 10-year professor, they know that the job entails continually evolving. They expect to be teaching something different in 5 years, and then 5 years from that, maybe something completely different. Maybe they transfer between divisions because they're like, you know what? I was in ethereal division, and we had the 0-point energy advancement, so I followed that advancement to the 0-point energy division to help. Aren't universities partly exhilarating and partly incredibly boring? My kid's a teacher, and she said something brilliant a few months ago when we talked about it. She said that, I'm very knowledgeable and I'm very engaging to my students, but she said, I can feel when I go in and observe a senior teacher that they have their shtick, they have their method of evolving, one link to the other link to the other link to pass the knowledge on to the kids. And she says, that's what I have to develop, and I will develop. She's developing it every day, of course, but she's going to evolve her ability to become the greatest teacher she can possibly be in her lifetime. And this is her, second year teaching. This is phenomenal that she's already on to that, and I didn't say anything. She just did it by herself. That's cool. She's got a bright future. But I've been to, colleges where I've spoke, Berkeley and UCI and a bunch of other ones. And I've been into engineering schools, and they do have divisions that create interesting projects for kids that are just phenomenal, some great schools. Don't mean to say anything disparaging. I'm not qualified to say anything disparaging. But what I never feel and I never went to I never went to Stanford to go to school. But when I would talk to individuals that do, talk to some of the professors there, they were always working on something interesting, but they weren't ever mentioning a situation where a separate division would work with their division to get something done. I'm sure that happens. But that should be the way it is structured from the very beginning. I think one of the kisses of death that happens to a university, and I only realized this much, much later in life, is if a particular university becomes famous for a particular discovery, they hang on to it like it's, money. And if the theory gets deprecated in time, they will put money in to bully you out of your theory. Someone asked me if I had discussed string theory. And my string theory background was when it came out, I bought 2 or 3 books on it because I was involved in this book club where I was getting at least a book a month, and I would always buy 2 more. But the literature on it was very minimal. And I read through it, and I thought, well, for me, I was getting a very strong vibe of this is simply not the way it works. It seemed like a very creative solution to explain things, which I think is a beautiful thing. Maybe we'll find out there's some element of it. I do think there's elements of it that are probably playing a role in the universe in terms of how things vibrate into existence. But that dude was so attacked by the academics of his time. I remember I was a big subscriber of Scientific American at the time, and just the hit pieces on this guy was really unprecedented and immature and unfortunate. That it was like, we don't like you, so you're out of here. Not proving anything, just simply criticizing this guy. I think we have to break that mold. What are some of the other things that might be might be indicators of a colliding universe? Well, we know that we have moods that we get in, right? Sometimes we get in moods where it seems almost spontaneous, like we have an angry spell. Something could be colliding with our universe to affect our chemical structure in our brain. Let's just give you an example of why this could be the case. Let's say that the universe collides and changes an atom or 2 or 1,000,000 in your arm. And then you get that little flicker in your muscle, and you're like, wow, that's crazy. Look at my muscle, man. It's flickering all by itself. And you just, whatever. Yeah. But now let's say that happens inside your brain. Ooh, we don't want that kind of stuff happening inside of our brain, right? Your eyelid, flickers like that or something out of thin air. Probably the cell phone tower. What was the deal with the Texas tower shooter? The guy's at the Texas University, and he gets up on a tower, and he's got this, I think, an M1 rifle, and he is just sharpshooting people on the ground. They didn't even know where the hell the guy was until someone went, oh my God, it's that dude up there. And when they got rid of him and did an autopsy on his body, he had a tumor pushing on his brain. And this has been something that we have seen several times. People are gigantic, people who are sometimes small. There's all kinds of things when you get little tumors in your brain. It's pushing on your mechanics. It's changing things. Okay. Well, that's very in your face, but at least that gives you a little cause and effect connection in your brain. I mean, in your brain. We're all talking about brains here. But it gives you a cause and effect connection model of don't mess with that thing, because that's your liaison mechanic that your soul's trying to use to create a consciousness so you can enter this reality and survive and not be a sharpshooter of people. But have you ever woke up one day and you feel depressed for some reason outside of any, thing that they're holding us down for? Some days you'll feel totally euphoric. Now, some of you might think it's your coffee or the lack thereof. But there'll be a moment when all that's taken care of and you just kind of, I feel weird. Or the funny one is that when I was in the Midwest, everyone had a barometer on their wall. The air pressure. And there's a lot of wisdom that we have lost about barometers. And barometers were huge. It would tell you whether it was going to be humid or not, whether you had a low pressure system over the house. It could rain. But there was also, as I remember it, a lot of links to human behavior. They say that a full moon makes people change their behaviors. Well, in my opinion, the reason why crime goes up on a full moon is that the criminals can see what the hell they're doing. I think that's one of the things I've never heard asserted, and I thought, well, that's a pretty stupid or shallow perspective on that thing. Perhaps the moon being full and projecting a bunch of light maybe creates more impacts. Who knows? But what if just a little bit of chemical structure in your body is getting changed every once in a while, radically? Because this impacting occurs all the time. It occurs in every XYZ in your body constantly. Why do some people have premonitions? What would be a premonition? It's a prediction of the future. Okay, so impacts are occurring constantly. And if you've ever seen a Star Trek episode where you've got some vortex or some wormhole where they're trying to get the Voyager back to Earth a little faster, it's an Einstein-Rosen bridge. You go through this thing and you jump like a hyperspace in a fold in the universe. You get to travel much further distance in a shorter path. Okay, so what if this collision system is merely opening up a perceptive hole where the consciousness energy from that future, not the event itself, none of the light particles or anything from that future event are coming through the hole and going into your eye, thus being registered in your real visual cortex. But you have this mind's eye view of what's going on. Well, let's just take my little premonition before 9/11. I told my girlfriend, I'm sorry I keep repeating this is going to sound more interesting in this particular example, that I thought something bad was about to happen. And then I saw planes, and I said, I think it has to do with planes. The night before, man, I don't need attention. I got plenty of attention in the world. I want less attention, okay? If an event like that occurs, which it did the next day, how many souls were screaming at that event? Hence, consciousness screaming. People going, oh my God, let alone the people that may have perished that day. So these impacts are occurring, creating these vortexes, because that's what impacts do. That's how ethereal matter stirs around the universe and creates slower moving constructs that we call atoms. But in this particular case, I was sitting in a bed, just really relaxing my mind, approaching the stage where I'm going to get into Twilight Zone. And all these voices are screaming. So the tiniest aperture from the next day opens up. And all this consciousness comes streaming to me. And even a scream of 10,000 souls, let alone a billion souls that scream that day, it just is a little tiny infinitesimal eye drop that falls into my world. And it has enough information that I'm able to discern it being bad. And then, because the press showed us these videos of planes, that was part of the consciousness stream and part of the packet transfer to me. And all I did was take it in, didn't know where to put it, and I blurted it out in words. Very important, man, when you think you have a premonition, to get it written down. Oh, how I wish we would have had cell phones with cameras on them. I would have done a selfie video and said that into the camera. And then with my consciousness now. And it would have been this amazing thing for all of us to witness. So that, for me, is just scratching the surface of this theory that perhaps this is a big cluster of realities. It is impacting potentially at every point in space and time. Could be that if I was standing 10 feet back, I would have got a different message tonight than the one I got sitting right here. But let me give you like a ridiculous one. I sit in the same place on my patio every time I do an episode. I've been doing it for 5+ years. In fact, this little porcelain thing that used to be in the intro has been sitting in that same spot for so long that there's a stain underneath it, and so I know exactly where to put that. I'll move it around a little bit when friends come over, but when I want to know where my chair goes, I put the porcelain thing back over it. The stain, it's a little round rectangle on the bottom, and I know the chair comes back so far because the camera's got to fit in there, and I'm always at the same place the entire time I do these episodes, and I'm smoking tobacco. Not paper with goo on it and a filter, but real tobacco, unchemically treated. And so my mind is got a really low wave, it's a low wave. It's a low sine wave. That's what tobacco does to you. It smooths out your brain, and it makes you very philosophical. It's an amazing thing, the conversations you have in a smoke lounge that you'll never get anywhere else. But let me just give you this idea. Have you ever had a chair in the house that you bought, and it was a leather chair? Doesn't have to be a leather chair, but leather chairs are the best ones to talk about this. It's essentially anything with a cushion pad in it. And you sit in that chair so much, and everyone else sits in it too. But if there's just, it's Grandpa's chair, and Grandpa's butt has a size, and his butt pad pushes down on the cushion, and even when Grandpa's not there, after 10 years, you can see Grandpa's butt right there in that chair. Don't sit in that chair. It's Grandpa's chair. Your butt's not big enough for that chair. Or if you do sit in it, you're like, ooh, this is all like, it's all shaped for butts. What if me sitting here on this patio is ceremoniously, through repetition, training this particular part of the universe to be a siphon? That if there's any consciousness participating in this show, gifting me with epiphanies as I'm talking to you, which many have occurred on the show, that this is sort of like a little temple. The wave comes in and it trains this area right here to be the area where ideas come from. My buddies come and we smoke together on the patio. They have the greatest time of their life in having a real conversation. One of my buddies comes over. It's a little less now since it's really cold out, but he'll say, it's so nice to have a real conversation for a change, because the guy's super smart, and everywhere he goes, it's, politics or something else trivial and trite. And we talk about everything, the Bible, we talk about reality and dreams, everything we talk about on the show. I get to practice on him. It's pretty funny. He is responsible for several episodes at this point. Hyper-narcissism was his phrase. Well, think about all the temples that are out there in the world where special things occur, because Tibetan monks are sitting there thinking about reality. They make their home on the top of a hill, isolated away from the rest of the congestion of thought. The trite is filtered out. And they're going deeper into the self than any other human beings on planet Earth. Plus, there's dozens and dozens of them resonating with some grand, enlightened guy running the joint per temple. What's a big principle of Kung Fu? Controlling the chi, which is merely a Chinese equivalent of what we call ether. When they're doing all those hand gestures before they do the fight, they're charging their body with the energy of the universe such that when they throw the first punch, it's got the energy of the universe stuffed in their body, waiting to come out in a fist punch or in a one-finger push-up, or they're using their fingers to penetrate leather, punch a rock in half, whatever they're doing, right? We don't acknowledge their multi-thousand year tradition as having any reality. Oh, it's those crazy guys up in the hill. Isn't that convenient? Well, you don't have to learn anything because you just pissed on them. Yeah, I don't think you do that. Some of you have moved around the world. I've never asked one of our listeners who's over in China, but maybe part of his journey was to feel another culture, to learn something that wasn't taught where he grew up. For those of you who've moved around a lot, you let me know if you've ever traveled to another culture and then just been blown away by just the incidental knowledge that was there. So anyway, this stuff is really interesting to me. Hopefully you found this a good exercise for your mind. Please chime in. Please let me know what part of this you dig, what part of this you might have experienced, elements of collisions, things that you might have observed that could be a collision, those little weird switcheroos that happen, introductions of information that you would have otherwise never experienced. Anyway, I think that's about all I got with that. Like I always say, please go to deepthoughtsradio.com and bookmark the website just in case we get pushed around by some big tech censorship. We'll always be up on BitChute. It's the other equivalent of the video. There's an app for your phone, by the way, and I think you can broadcast it to your TV too. But anyway, we have 2 video, 2 audio, some social media, all new remastered season 1, a store, a couple ways to donate to this movement. Been very, very helpful for those of you who have been surrendering your hard-earned dollars. I hope I'm earning every dollar For those of you who have, I just so appreciate it. And for those that can't, and you're just gifting me with your presence, equal appreciation to you too. Anyway, take care of yourself and someone else, and I will see you in the next Deep Thoughts. Over now.